going on, everyone? John Evans here. Today we're going to talk about sprinting, right? It's one of my favorite topics. I love it. I think from an athletic standpoint, especially for youth athletes, it is one of the most coveted attributes that does not get enough time and attention in training, even though it gets plenty of attention on TV. So the question today is, how many days per week can you sprint? The answer, as are most of my answers, is it depends. There's a lot of factors that we have to attribute: training age of the athlete, just general biological age of the athlete, how good are you at sprinting, technical, the display of the technique, right? The technical ability combined with just the performance component. How good are you, right? That will affect how we answer this question. What sport do you play? How busy is your sport? Is it in season, off season? All of these things come in, right? That's why I always advocate, especially for you young guys, to get on some type of program that knows what you're doing, at least 2, 3, 4 weeks out, right? We have a tendency to emulate the pros in almost every aspect of youth sports, but not in the programming, which is always kind of interesting to me, right? Because that's what it takes to maintain that level of performance. You're not going to compete with the world's elite without having structure to your training. But anyways, that's a side note. When we break apart that question, there's a couple ways that we can go. I would advocate by and large for most athletes to sprint more often, if possible. Tolerable workload, and especially when we get into the in-season, off-season, which is what I'm going to get into next, we really want to accumulate volume in the off-season. But for, in season, and again, I always say youth athletes, some of the older guys actually do get traditional in season, off season, but a lot of our youth club sports in America now are somewhat year round. It makes it increasingly hard to improve performance, increase some of the attributes that we're looking for, because the focus is on competition, oftentimes multiple times in a week. But when we get into that in-season, off-season in relation to speed and sprint volume, in-season is really just the necessity, and the requirement is to cater to your sport. So that's competition frequency, that's training, that's your technical, tactical, that's going to be a lot of head coach, right? And strength and conditioning really is a supplemental position. So for me, when my athletes are in season, I'm targeting certain things that I want to hit, but I'm being realistic with them. And I know that ultimately at the end of the day, the head coach, the technical director, whoever's in charge of these athletes is going to, dictate their training schedule. So in season caters to your sport. I would like to see, from a sprinting standpoint, I would probably say at least 2 days a week. If we can get in 1 day of higher intensity max velocity work, I'm fine with that. I would like to see 2 days a week, preferably at least a day, if not 2 days apart. So maybe let's say you had games on the weekend, we're coming in Monday, probably a recovery day. Tuesday, we can get in a little bit of acceleration volume if you are feeling pretty good. Wednesday would be a really great day where that could fit in, right? We want our weeks to kind of peak and then taper off to be ready and prepared to have our 100% effort and performance on game day. And then right before games, surprisingly, a lot of athletes, coaches, and parents would be surprised to hear that, but it's a good way to kind of what's called potentiation. So basically, we're just getting a high intensity neural activity, get everything firing, get everything where it needs to go. Very high intensity, short duration, short volume, really quick, get in, get out. And now that body is ready to perform maximally, whether that be the next day or, Saturday, Sunday, depending, especially for you youth guys. Now, I do think that you can get in more, right? Like a creative way would be a concept of microdosing, which I'll make another video on, which is that essentially during the in-season especially, we would just in our warm-up hit a set specified amount of accelerations, whatever it is we're targeting, and then we look at our weekly volume of sprints, right? So then we could say, hey, that 1 or 2 day a week, maybe even 3, depending on your sport and age, that number could be 5 days a week, right? If we're hitting an extended warm-up, so to speak, of sprinting work, microdosing. Off season, that's when the work happens, right? I think the famous quote I've seen is the sins of summer are answered for in winter, or something along those lines, right? What that really relates to is you get a lot of these youth athletes that just do camps, or for some of our traditional fall winter sports, you get a lot of athletes in the off season that just kind of goof off and they don't take it seriously. They don't acquire enough volume, especially with sprinting, and their performance suffers, right? You'll see hamstring pulls. That's something that's been talked about, especially I believe last season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They were talking about tons of hamstring pulls on the team. Maybe there just wasn't enough attention or volume accumulated in the offseason when it comes to high intensity runs to kind of, I don't like injury prevention, but kind of build a robust hamstring. So, the off season we're going to put in work. I would say if we're going on a traditional standard lifting, sprinting, not very much technical, tactical sports skill work being done, I'd like to see some form of high intensity running 2 or 3 days a week even. I'd say 2, conservative side if we're doing a lot. If the focus is speed, you've identified that as a weakness, we might bump that up to 3 days. It is very taxing, so we do have to watch the volume, especially when we are doing things like lifting weights. I'm sure there's other athletic components that are being worked on, and we know everybody does work on their sports skill as well. So it's really just a good time to give sprinting a little bit of focus in the off season if possible, but really just fit it in. As long as you have a program, I'd be fine with that. Now, beginner advanced would be a pretty big way to determine how many days a week you can get away with sprinting. Surprisingly, the younger groups, I think, I'll have to double check on the actual numbers. I know females are a little bit earlier than males, but kind of in those early teenage years is when we have the central nervous system. There's a lot of plasticity, right? So something like exposing athletes to a large volume of sprint work, hopefully in theory would lead to them having a better, more efficiently developed nervous system as they approach, adulthood. The advanced guys, your performance output's high. So we really have to monitor volume and intensity a lot when we get up to advanced levels, just because, at that point we're racehorses, right? So same thing with cars. You can drive a Toyota across country, but there's a reason why they have a finite amount of miles in NASCAR, right? They are built and designed to do one thing very, very well. That is speed. You're not going to drive, Jeff Gordon's not driving all over the country, right? In, number 24 or something like that. Now, within that beginner advance, you can get into strength weaknesses, right? I mean, an advanced athlete might have a deficiency in maybe some sort of sprint technique, where we would want to bump up the how often we're addressing that, or maybe is just wants to work on that attribute. Speed takes a long time to develop, right? So we would want to identify that early. But that just comes down to the individual. That's a needs analysis. That's why you need a coach. That's why you need to pay attention. And that's why, as an athlete, you need to be honest with yourself. Because we're going to look at the needs of the sport, and we're also going to look at the needs of the individual athlete and see how those things compare, right? So I think speed needs to be addressed regardless of strength or weakness. But let's say you have some genetic gifts, or your sport doesn't necessarily require a great deal of acceleration ability or max velocity. So at that point, then we would kind of break down the volume there. But I really still keep coming back to, I like to see my athletes at least hit one high intensity day of sprinting per week. Preferably, I would like to have that number be 2 days. And it really does come down to volume, right? I mean, one session of 50 yards worth of acceleration, 5 accelerations of 10 yards, let's say. Okay, fine. That would not be the same as, say, running 4 40-yard dashes with a 5-minute rest in between, right? So how the volume is distributed, which I will get into. Like I said, I'm gonna make a whole series on speed. That is important, but if we're just looking what everybody thinks of as a traditional sprint workout, which probably is a little bit of high volume, I'd like to still see 2 days a week as just a blanket guideline for the sake of this video. And your sport will dictate that, right? pretty much all field sports need to be sprinting on a regular basis. There's injury prevention components. We know that it attributes to start-stop abilities, agility skills. So even though you're running linearly, you will see some improvements in what most field sports are, right? Multi-directional. But it's really something that, again, the nuances of that probably should be addressed with an actual coach that's looking over your program, looking over what you're doing within your sport, because a lot of athletes these days are 24/7. They don't turn off. I know, working in the youth soccer world for quite a while now, these guys are, at the higher levels because they're young. They're training anywhere as much as 6 days a week. Some of them are even doing stuff, going for a jog, making it, on a Sunday. So, overall summary, how often can you get away with sprinting per week? How many days? It depends. I think that the problem really would be, because that's a volume question, more is better approach. The real question would be, how much are you even dedicating to this now? Because I think a lot of times I do get asked, how much can I do this? How often can I do this? In the heat of the moment, when athletes are excited, they've really enjoyed this session, they want more of it. Okay, I would really say, how many days did you dedicate to it last month? If it wasn't at least 1 day a week, let's start there first, right? Let's build a habit, let's teach, let's learn, let's build skills and technique before we go to some sort of high volume routine. But as a general guideline, I would say in season, 1 to 2 days per week, off season, 2 to 3 days per week for how often you can have a traditional sprint workout. Now, keep in mind, like I said, I did touch on the microdosing concept. So you could, in theory, low dose and accumulate your volume that way as well. But that's it. Video's getting a little long here. Just wanted to touch on this question. Stay tuned for more videos related to speed development, speed technique, specific components of speed within unique individual sports. I'm going to cover all of it, guys. So just stay tuned. Watch the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time. Thanks.